like a sanctuary. It was a day I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. My wedding day. The sun was casting a golden glow over the garden, where rows of white chairs faced a beautifully adorned arch. I stood there in my flowing gown, feeling like a character out of a fairy tale. My heart fluttered with excitement, but a shadow of unease lingered in the back of my mind. As I walked down the aisle, my eyes searched for him, my soon-to-be husband, Mark. He stood there, handsome as ever in his sharp suit, but his eyes didn't hold the sparkle I expected. They darted around, restless and clouded with something I couldn't quite place. Was it just nerves? I tried to convince myself it was. After the ceremony, as we mingled with our guests, I caught Mark's arm. "You seemed miles away during the vows. Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. He forced a smile, his hand gently squeezing mine. "It's just weddings, you know. They can be overwhelming. But I'm fine, Emily." Really, he reassured me, but his words felt hollow. Later, as we sat at our table, I tried again. "Mark, this is supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. I just want to make sure you're truly happy." He looked at me, his expression softening. "Emily, I am happy. It's just all this. It's a lot. But I'm with you, and that's all that matters." His words were the right ones, but something in his tone didn't sit right with me. The rest of the evening was a blur of dancing, laughter, and celebration. Yet, amidst the joy, my mind kept returning to Mark's distant demeanor. It was as if a small crack had appeared in our perfect day, a crack I couldn't ignore. As we drove off to our honeymoon, his hand found mine, and he squeezed it tightly. "I love you, Emily. You know that, right?" he said, his voice earnest. "I love you too, Mark," I replied, wanting to believe that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew our journey was starting on an uncertain note, a note that would echo in the days to come. The initial weeks of our marriage were like living inside a dream. Mark and I settled into my cozy house, turning it into our home. The mornings were filled with shared laughter over breakfast, and the evenings were quiet, intimate affairs. I was working at a large corporation, a job that I loved and that paid well. Mark, on the other hand, was part of a small startup. His earnings were modest, but he seemed passionate about his work. As time went by, a subtle shift began to take place. Mark started staying late at work more often than not. At first, it seemed understandable. Startup life can be demanding. But when he began coming home late at night, sometimes reeking of alcohol, worry started to gnaw at me. One evening, as we sat down for a rare dinner together, I decided to broach the subject. "Mark, I've noticed you've been coming home late a lot. And sometimes you've had too much to drink. Is everything okay at work?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle. He looked up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "It's just work, Emily. You know how it is. Deadlines, meetings, and sometimes we go out for drinks. It's nothing to worry about." "But I do worry, Mark. I miss spending time with you. Can't you come home earlier?" I pressed, my concern growing. Mark let out a sigh, his fork clattering against his plate. "I can't just leave work, Emily. You wouldn't understand. Your job is so structured. Mine isn't like that." I felt a sting at his words. "I just miss you, that's all," I murmured, feeling a chasm growing between us. As the pattern continued, our conversations about his late nights became more frequent and heated. One night, when he came home particularly late, I couldn't hold back my frustration. "This has to stop, Mark. You're coming home late every night, and half the time you're drunk. What's going on?" Mark's response was sharp and quick. "I'm just trying to keep my job, Emily. Maybe if you were a bit more understanding, this wouldn't be such a problem." I recoiled at his words, a mixture of hurt and anger bubbling inside me. Understanding? I've been nothing but supportive. But this is not just about work, is it? He didn't answer, just walked away, leaving me standing in the silent kitchen, my heart heavy with a growing sense of dread. I knew something was deeply wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was as if Mark was slipping away from me, and I was powerless to stop it. The warmth that once filled our home now felt like a distant memory. Mark's late nights became the norm, and our conversations dwindled to brief, cold exchanges. The distance between us felt like a tangible, suffocating fog, thickening with each passing day. One evening, as I sat alone at the dinner table with 2 plates of food growing cold, The weight of our strained relationship pressed heavily on me. When Mark finally walked in, the clock had long struck midnight. His steps were unsteady, his eyes avoiding mine. "Mark, we need to talk." "This can't go on," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laden with emotion. He slumped into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "Not now, Emily. I'm tired. It's always the same conversation." "But it's a conversation we need to have. You're out every night, and I don't even know who you are anymore." My voice rose, a mix of frustration and hurt. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm the same person, Emily. I'm just trying to make a living. Why can't you see that?" His voice was a mix of defensiveness and exhaustion. I reached out to him, my own anger subsiding into worry. "Is it just work, Mark, or is there something else? Something you're not telling me?" He shook his head, avoiding my gaze. "There's nothing else. It's just stress, that's all." But his words did little to quell the storm of doubts in my mind. Our home no longer felt like a sanctuary, but rather a silent battleground fraught with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. In an effort to find some clarity, I confided in my closest friend, Sarah, over coffee one weekend. "I just don't know what to do anymore. It feels like he's slipping away from me," I confessed, the worry evident in my voice. Sarah reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "Have you thought about seeing a counselor? Maybe it could help to talk things out, get some professional advice." I sighed, considering the suggestion. "I've thought about it, but I'm not even sure Mark would agree to go. He doesn't think there's a problem." "You can't just keep going on like this. You deserve to be happy, and it's clear you're not," Sarah said, her concern for me evident. I nodded, knowing she was right, but the thought of confronting the issues head-on filled me with an overwhelming sense of dread. As the days turned into weeks, the gap between Mark and me grew wider. Conversations were now limited to necessities, and the laughter and warmth that once filled our home were replaced by a chilling silence. One night, as we lay in bed, backs turned to each other, I whispered into the darkness, "Mark, are we okay?" There was a long pause before he replied, his voice hollow. "I don't know, Emily." His words echoed in the stillness of the room, mirroring the uncertainty that lay in my heart. The strain was not just growing, it was tearing us apart, and I was at a loss on how to mend the widening rift. The turning point came unexpectedly. It was a bleak Thursday morning when Mark received the call that his father had passed away. I watched him crumble under the weight of the news, his face pale and his hands trembling. Despite our strained relationship, my heart ached for him. As he prepared for the funeral, Mark was unusually silent, his grief a quiet storm raging within him. I offered my support, wanting to be there for him, but he was adamant. "Emily, I need to do this alone. Please, don't come to the funeral," he said, his voice strained. "But why? I want to support you through this," I protested, confused and hurt by his request. "It's just complicated, family stuff." Reluctantly, I agreed, though his insistence gnawed at me. But as the day of the funeral approached, curiosity and concern overpowered me. I decided to attend unbeknownst to Mark. I arrived at the funeral a little late, staying towards the back to avoid being noticed. The service was somber, the air heavy with grief. I scanned the crowd for Mark and found him standing beside a young woman I had never seen before. She was leaning into him, her hand resting gently on his arm in a way that was unmistakably intimate. My heart sank as I watched them, a cold realization dawning on me. I approached them quietly, my mind racing. Mark's eyes widened in shock as he saw me, the color draining from his face. I beckoned him aside, my voice calm but firm. "We need to talk, but not here. We'll discuss this at home." He nodded, his expression one of horror and guilt. As I left the funeral, the image of them together burned in my mind, confirming the fears I had been pushing away. The drive home was a blur of emotions. I felt betrayed, angry, and foolish all at once. I was reeling from the revelation, but knew I had to confront Mark and uncover the truth. When he returned home later, his face was a mask of dread. "Emily, I cut him off, my voice ice cold. "Explain what? That you've been having an affair? That all those late nights weren't just about work?" He winced at my words, his guilt evident. "It's not what you think. I was going to tell you, but What, Mark? That you couldn't find the right time, or that you were too cowardly to face the consequences of your actions? He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Emily. I never meant to hurt you. The words hung in the air, hollow and inadequate. The revelation at the funeral was more than just the uncovering of an affair. It was the shattering of trust, the breaking of a bond I thought was unbreakable. As I stood there, looking at the man I thought I knew, I realized that our marriage was beyond salvaging. The man I married had vanished, replaced by a stranger I could no longer trust. The house felt colder than ever as the reality of Mark's betrayal settled in. I sat in the living room, the silence deafening, waiting for him to come back from the funeral. The image of him with that woman replayed in my mind, each loop a fresh cut to my heart. When Mark finally walked through the door, his face was a mix of guilt and fear. He hesitated at the entrance, as if unsure whether he was still welcome in what used to be our sanctuary. Emily, he started, but I held up a hand to stop him. Save it, Mark. I saw you at the funeral. With her. How long has it been going on? My voice was steady, but inside I was a tempest of emotions. He sighed, a resigned look on his face. A few months. I just did. Do you hear yourself? You make it sound like an accident, I exclaimed, my composure cracking. He moved closer, but I stepped back. Emily, I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you. I never wanted to. To get caught, I interjected bitterly. Or to hurt me, because Mark, you've managed to do both. He looked down, unable to face my gaze. I'm sorry. I know it's not enough, but I am, truly. I shook my head, disbelief and anger swirling within me. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it, Mark. You've been lying to me, sneaking around. How could you do this to us? He tried to reach out, his voice breaking. Emily, please. I know I've messed up, but I love you. We can fix this. I recoiled from his touch, my decision clear. Fix this. There's nothing left to fix, Mark. You've broken everything. Us, our marriage, my trust. I walked over to the hallway and picked up a suitcase. I've packed your things. You need to leave. Mark's face crumbled in disbelief. You're throwing me out? Yes, Mark, I am. You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine. I can't be with someone I can't trust. He stood there stunned as I handed him the suitcase. Where will I go? He asked, a note of desperation in his voice. That's not my problem anymore, Mark. You should have thought about that before. As he took the suitcase and walked out the door, the finality of the moment hit me. I had loved this man, trusted him with my heart, and he had shattered it into pieces. But in that moment of confrontation, I also found a strength I didn't know I had. The strength to stand up for myself and to walk away from what was no longer healthy or right for me. The house was quiet once he left, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the sound of a chapter closing, a painful yet necessary end. As I sat down, letting the tears finally come, I knew that the road ahead would be tough. But for the first time in a long while, I also felt a glimmer of hope. The hope of a new beginning, one where I could rebuild and find myself again. In the weeks following Mark's departure, the house felt both empty and strangely full. Full of the echoes of a life we once shared, now shattered by betrayal. The process of filing for divorce was a bureaucratic reminder of the emotional turmoil I was enduring. I met with my lawyer, Ms. Jacobs, a kind but no nonsense woman. She spread out the papers in front of me, her voice steady and practical. Emily, given the circumstances, the law is on your side. We'll file for an at-fault divorce citing infidelity. You have a strong case. I nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and resolve. I just want this to be over, I said quietly. I understand, she replied. But remember, this is about protecting your interests, especially considering the disparity in your incomes and contributions to the marriage. The legal proceedings seemed to drag on, but eventually, the day came when the divorce was finalized. Mark and I faced each other in the courthouse, a stark contrast to the last time we were in a public setting together. He looked worn, his eyes avoiding mine. Emily, he began, his voice trailing off. There's nothing to say, Mark. It's over, I interrupted, not wanting to revisit the pain. He nodded, his shoulders slumping. I never wanted it to end like this. Neither did I, Mark. But you made your choices, I replied, my voice firm. The judge's gavel signaled the end of our marriage. I was awarded the house and a significant portion of our shared assets, along with a monetary compensation from Mark. It was a hollow victory. The courtroom felt cold and sterile, a far cry from the warm, hopeful place where we had exchanged our vows. After the divorce, I spent many nights revisiting the memories of our time together, trying to make sense of how it all went wrong. But with each passing day, the sharp edges of betrayal began to dull, giving way to a clearer understanding of myself and what I deserved. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Ellis, to navigate through the labyrinth of my emotions. It's important to grieve, Emily, not just for your marriage, but for the future you thought you'd have, she advised during one of our sessions. I know, I said, a tear sliding down my cheek, but it's hard. Some days I feel so angry, and other days just numb. That's normal. Healing isn't linear, but you're making progress, and that's what counts, Dr. Ellis reassured me. As the weeks turned into months, I began to find solace in small things. A morning jog, a good book, coffee with friends. Life without Mark was different, but it was slowly becoming mine again. I was rediscovering who I was outside the shadow of our marriage. The divorce and its aftermath were a journey through the darkest parts of my heart. But as I emerged on the other side, I realized that I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I had faced betrayal and heartache, and I had not only survived, but started to thrive. It was a bittersweet realization, but one that filled me with a sense of hope and a newfound respect for myself. The final chapter of my story is not one of an ending, but rather the beginning of a new journey. The months following the divorce were a time of deep introspection and gradual healing. My home, once a shared space filled with our dreams and plans, slowly transformed into a sanctuary of my own making. One evening, as I sat in the newly redecorated living room, my friend Sarah visited. She looked around, noticing the changes. "You've really made this place your own, Emily. It feels so." "You?" she said, a smile spreading across her face. I smiled back, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. It took a while, but I feel like I'm finally getting there. Making this place mine, finding myself again. Sarah nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. "It's been a tough road, but look at you, stronger and more yourself than ever." Our conversation drifted to future plans, dreams I had shelved during my marriage. "I've been thinking about starting that bakery I always talked about," I shared, the idea sparking excitement within me. "That's fantastic, Emily. It's about time you pursued your passion," Sarah encouraged. Her words bolstered my resolve. The dream of opening a bakery, once a distant wish, now felt like a tangible goal, a piece of the new life I was building. Therapy sessions with Dr. Ellis became a cornerstone of my recovery. During one session, I expressed my newfound sense of hope. "I feel like I'm finally moving forward, Dr. Ellis, not just surviving, but actually living." Dr. Ellis smiled, her eyes reflecting her pride in my progress. "That's a significant step, Emily. You're not just rebuilding your life. You're redefining it on your own terms." Her words resonated with me. The pain of the past, while not entirely gone, had become a part of my story, not a defining aspect of it. I was learning to embrace life with all its uncertainties and possibilities. As the anniversaries of my wedding day came and went, I found myself reflecting less on what was lost and more on what lay ahead. I started taking baking classes, each session a step closer to my dream. The joy I found in creating something beautiful and delicious from simple ingredients was a metaphor for the new life I was crafting for myself. One afternoon, while experimenting with a new pastry recipe, I realized how far I had come. The kitchen, once a place of shared meals and conversations, was now a space of creativity and growth. I had come to terms with the fact that some chapters in our lives had to close for new ones to open. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past or the love I had for Mark. It meant accepting what had happened, learning from it, and allowing myself to grow beyond it. It was about finding joy in the present and hope in the future. It was about understanding that even in the wake of heartbreak, life could be rich and fulfilling. As I put the finishing touches on a batch of pastries, the oven timer dinged, a sound that I had come to associate with accomplishment and new beginnings. I realized that moving forward wasn't just a journey. It was a destination in itself, one where peace, self-discovery, and happiness were waiting. And as I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the sweet aroma of baking, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. In the quiet suburbs of a small town, nestled among rows of nearly identical houses, stood the one where I, Olivia, spent my early years. It was a modest two-story with a garden that had seen better days and a mailbox that leaned slightly to the side, like it was tired of standing up straight. I remember the days when Mom was still with us. She was the soul of our home, filling it with laughter and warmth. But after she passed away, everything changed. Dad, a respected doctor, threw himself into his work, leaving my sister, Emily, and me to navigate our grief alone. Emily, 3 years my senior, seemed to handle it better, or maybe she just hid her pain more effectively. Dad's attention, whenever he was home, was always on Emily. She was bright, excelling in school, and it was clear she was his pride and joy. I often felt like a shadow in our home, unnoticed and unimportant. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, a rare occasion when Dad was home early, the difference in his demeanor towards us was stark. "Emily, I heard from your teacher today. She says you're top of your class in biology. I'm so proud of you. You're truly my daughter," he said, a smile lighting up his face for the first time in what seemed like months. "Thanks, Dad," Emily replied, her cheeks flushed with pride. I fiddled with my food, feeling the familiar sting of being left out. "I got an A in English," I mumbled, more to my plate than anyone else. Dad's smile faded as he turned to me. "English? What use is that, Olivia? Why can't you be more like your sister? She's going to be a great doctor one day." His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt my face burn with shame and embarrassment. It wasn't just that he was disappointed. It was as if he couldn't understand why I couldn't be someone else, someone more like Emily. After dinner, I retreated to my room, the only place I felt some semblance of peace. I could hear Emily and Dad laughing in the living room, and I pressed a pillow over my ears, trying to block out the sound. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but wonder why Dad couldn't see me for who I was. Why was I always the one left in the shadows? The answer eluded me, as it always did, lost in the silence of our house. The chapter continues to explore the dynamics between Olivia, her sister, and their father, delving deeper into the emotional landscape of a young girl trying to find her place in a world that seems to have forgotten her. This sets the foundation for Olivia's journey towards self-discovery and independence. High school was a time when most teenagers were finding themselves, making friends, and enjoying the awkward journey to adulthood. But for me, Olivia, it was a period marked by a deepening sense of invisibility within my own family. As we grew older, Emily's achievements became more pronounced, especially in the eyes of our father. She was not just excelling academically, but also showing a keen interest in following Dad's footsteps into medicine. This seemed to further widen the gap between Dad and me. One evening, during my sophomore year, Emily came home bubbling with excitement. Dad was in the living room, buried in a pile of medical journals. I was curled up in a corner with a book, a habit I had developed to escape my reality. "Guess what, Dad?" Emily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. Dad looked up, his eyes lighting up with pride. "That's wonderful, Emily. I knew you had it in you. You're going to make an excellent doctor one day." I watched from my corner, feeling a mix of pride for Emily and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I knew what was coming next. "And what about you, Olivia? What have you done lately?" I closed my book, feeling my heart rate increase. Dad shook his head, barely trying to hide his disdain. "Literature, that's a hobby, Olivia, not a career. Why don't you try to be more like your sister?" The words stung as they always did. I looked down at my book, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Emily shot me a sympathetic look, but she was quickly drawn back into a conversation with Dad about her symposium. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a growing resentment. It wasn't just towards Dad for his obvious favoritism, but also towards Emily. It wasn't her fault, but she represented everything I was not, and everything Dad wanted me to be. As the days turned into months, this pattern continued. It wasn't that I didn't have my own successes. I was doing well in school, and my literature club was making a real impact in the community. But in Dad's eyes, these accomplishments were trivial compared to the grandeur of a career in medicine. One afternoon, as I sat in the library working on a literature club project, a realization hit me. I didn't need Dad's approval to be proud of my achievements. I was carving my own path, one that was different from Emily's, but no less important. This newfound understanding didn't erase the hurt or the longing for my father's acceptance, but it did give me a sense of purpose. I was more than just Emily's little sister. I was Olivia with my own dreams and aspirations. And that was something worth holding on to. College was a breath of fresh air for me, Olivia. It was my chance to step out from under Emily's shadow and my father's expectations. I chose a college far enough away to give me a sense of independence, but close enough to visit home if I wanted to, though I seldom did. In my second year, I stumbled upon a field that sparked a genuine interest in me: dentistry. It was during a health sciences elective that I realized my fascination with the intricacies of dental care and its impact on overall health. One afternoon, I was in the college library, deeply engrossed in a text about dental anatomy, when my friend, Clara, approached me. Clara had always been more like a sister to me than Emily ever was. "Hey, Olivia, what's got you so captivated?" Clara asked, peering over my shoulder. I looked up, a smile spreading across my face. "It's this course on dentistry. I never realized how complex and interesting it is. It's like a puzzle, understanding each part of the oral cavity and how it affects our health." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Dentistry, huh? That's pretty cool. You always did like solving puzzles." Our conversation was interrupted by a call from my father. My heart sank a little, as it always did when I saw his name on my phone screen. I answered, bracing myself for the usual disappointment in his tone. "Olivia, your sister just got accepted into med school. What are you doing with your life? Have you given any more thought to pursuing a real career, like medicine?" I took a deep breath, feeling a newfound confidence. "Actually, Dad, I've found something I'm really passionate about. I'm thinking of going into dentistry." There was a pause on the other end, and then, "Dentistry? That's not a real doctor, Olivia. Why must you always choose the easy way out?" The words hurt, but I stood my ground. "It's not the easy way out, Dad. It's what I'm interested in. It's what I want to do." He sighed, a sound of resignation rather than understanding. "Well, it's your life. Just don't come running to me when you realize you've made a mistake." As I hung up, Claire put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't listen to him, Olivia. You've got to do what's right for you, not what's right for him." That conversation with my father was a turning point for me. It was the moment I realized that I would never fit into the mold he had set for me, and more importantly, that I didn't have to. I began to immerse myself in my studies with a renewed vigor, determined to excel in a field I had chosen for myself. I spent the rest of my college years balancing academics with practical experiences in dental clinics. The more I learned, the more I knew I had made the right choice. It was a world away from the life my father had envisioned for me, but it was my life, and I was determined to live it on my own terms. As college came to an end, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension about the future. I was stepping into the unknown, but for the first time, it was a path that I had chosen for myself. And that made all the difference. After college, I, Olivia, embarked on the challenging journey of establishing my career in dentistry. The path was fraught with obstacles, but each hurdle only strengthened my resolve. I worked tirelessly, often juggling multiple roles as an intern, a researcher, and a part-time clinician. A few years into my career, my hard work began to pay off. I was offered a partnership at a well-established dental clinic in the city. It was a dream come true, a testament to my dedication and skill. Yet, this triumph was mine alone. I hadn't shared my progress with my father or Emily. I feared their reaction, or worse, their indifference. One evening, I was celebrating this milestone with my close friends at a small, cozy restaurant downtown. Amid the laughter and congratulations, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Emily, a rare occurrence. "Hey, Olivia. Dad's asking about what you're doing these days. He's curious if you ever made anything of yourself. What should I tell him?" I stared at the screen, a familiar sting of old wounds surfacing. I typed out a reply, keeping it vague. "Tell him I'm doing fine, just working." As I put my phone away, my friend Mark noticed my change in demeanor. "Everything okay, Olivia?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, it's just family stuff. You know how it is." Mark nodded, understandingly. "You've done an amazing thing, Olivia. Don't let anyone, not even family, make you feel otherwise." His words were comforting, but they couldn't erase the years of feeling overshadowed and undervalued by my family. The following week, I found myself in an upscale dental conference, rubbing shoulders with some of the best in the field. I was presenting a paper I had co-authored on innovative dental prosthetics, a significant achievement in my career. As I walked off the stage to a round of applause, my phone rang. "Olivia, Emily told me you're just working. Why don't you take your career seriously? You know, it's not too late to consider medical school." The call took me aback, especially after the high of my successful presentation. "Dad, I am serious about my career. I'm actually doing very well in dentistry." There was a pause, and then, "Dentistry? That's not a real career. You could have been a doctor like your sister." The words hit hard, but I found strength in my achievements. Dentistry is a real career, Dad, and I'm good at it. I wish you could see that. He didn't respond, and the line went dead. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. It was clear that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough for him. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on my journey. I had built a successful career, one that I was proud of, but I had done it without the support of my family. It was a bittersweet realization. I decided then to focus on my achievements and the life I had built for myself, rather than seeking validation from those who could not see my worth. The chapter of my unspoken success was just that, mine and unspoken, but it was filled with accomplishments that spoke volumes about who I was and what I was capable of, even if my father couldn't see it. Years had passed since I, Olivia, had chosen to carve my own path in dentistry, leaving behind my father's expectations and the shadow of my sister Emily. My career had flourished, yet the chasm between my family and me had only widened. Communication was sparse, often limited to brief, formal exchanges during holidays or obligatory family gatherings. One such occasion arose, a family dinner at Dad's house, a rare event meant to celebrate Emily's latest achievement in her medical career. I arrived with a mix of reluctance and a faint hope for some semblance of familial connection. The evening began with polite small talk, the kind that skirts around the edges of deeper conversations. Emily shared stories of her residency at a prestigious hospital, each tale met with Dad's beaming pride. Then, as we settled into the main course, Dad turned his attention to me, his tone tinged with a familiar criticism. "So, Olivia, it's been a while since we've heard about your career. How is your little dental practice going?" The room grew tense. Emily glanced at me, a silent plea for peace in her eyes. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "It's going well, Dad. The practice is growing, and we're making a real difference in people's lives." Dad scoffed, his words sharp and cutting. "A real difference? You could have been making a real difference as a doctor, like your sister. Instead, you chose this lesser path." The old wound, always simmering just beneath the surface, began to throb. Dentistry is not a lesser path, Dad. It's a vital part of healthcare. I've worked hard to build my practice, and I'm proud of what I've achieved. Dad's expression hardened. "Proud? You turned your back on a noble profession for teeth. You've always been the disappointment, Olivia. I just hoped you'd come to your senses eventually." Emily interjected, her voice a mix of concern and frustration. "Dad, that's enough. Olivia's done well for herself." But Dad was unrelenting. "No, Emily. She needs to hear this. She's dishonored our family, and I can't pretend to be proud of her choices." His words struck like a physical blow. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, hurt, and a deep-seated frustration. Standing up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, I faced him. "Dishonored the family? Because I chose a different career. No, Dad, the only dishonor here is your inability to see and respect your own daughter's choices." The room fell silent. Dad's face reddened, his anger palpable. "If you can't respect my wishes, then you can leave my house. I won't have such disrespect at my table." Without a word, I turned and left, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the tense air. Emily called out, but I didn't stop. The finality of the moment hung heavily around me. Outside, under the cold night sky, I felt a mixture of liberation and deep sadness. The confrontation had been brewing for years, and now it had erupted, leaving a gaping rift between me and my family. As I drove away, the weight of the evening settled in. I had stood up for myself, for my choices, but at what cost? The pain of my father's rejection was sharp, yet there was a sense of relief too. I had finally spoken my truth, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the burden of his expectations. The chapter closed on a bittersweet note, marking the end of my struggle for my father's approval and the beginning of a new chapter, one where I could fully embrace my own identity, independent of my family's shadow. The confrontation at my father's house left me, Olivia, in a state of emotional turmoil. The drive home was a blur, my mind replaying the harsh words and the final, painful severance of my familial ties. The house I returned to was quiet, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging within me. The next morning, I was scheduled to attend an important dental conference. My mind, however, was far from the intricacies of dentistry. As I prepared, my thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was my chauffeur, a service I had indulged in since my practice had become successful. "Good morning, Mrs. Olivia. The car is ready where," he said with a polite smile. I nodded, offering a faint smile in return. The luxury car, a symbol of my hard-earned success, suddenly felt like an empty consolation. The conference was a whirlwind of presentations and networking, but my heart wasn't in it. My encounter with my father had left a deep scar, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of rejection. As the day drew to a close, I decided to make a stop at my parents' house. A part of me yearned for closure, for some sign of reconciliation. I arrived to find my father in the garden, tending to the flowers that had been my mother's pride. He looked up, surprise etched on his face. "Olivia, what are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, the words flowing out. "I came to say that I'm sorry for last night, but I'm not sorry for my choices. I've built a successful practice, Dad. I help people every day, and I'm good at what I do." He put down his gardening tools, wiping his hands on his apron. "I saw your car, Olivia. How did you afford something like that? You said your practice was just doing fine." The question stung, but I stood my ground. Yes, it's more than fine. I've worked hard and I've made a good life for myself. A life I chose, not the one you wanted for me. Dad's expression softened slightly. "I just wanted the best for you, Olivia. I thought following in my footsteps was that best." "But it wasn't, Dad. It was never what I wanted. I found my own way, and I'm happy with it. I just wish you could be happy for me, too." He looked away, a mix of emotions crossing his face. "I don't understand your choices, Olivia. But maybe I don't have to. It's your life, after all." It wasn't a complete acceptance, but it was a start. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, Dad. That's all I ever wanted." As I drove away, I felt a sense of closure. The confrontation and this subsequent conversation marked a turning point in my relationship with my father. It was a tentative step towards understanding and, perhaps, acceptance. The chapter ended with me looking towards the future, ready to embrace whatever came my way. The path I had chosen wasn't easy, but it was mine, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace with it. The resolution with my father marked a pivotal change in my life. The past, with its shadows of neglect and misunderstanding, had given way to a present filled with possibilities and a future unburdened by the need for approval. I, Olivia, stood at the threshold of a new chapter, one where my identity and achievements were defined by my own standards. As I settled into this newfound sense of self, my dental practice continued to thrive. I had built a reputation not just for excellence in dentistry, but also for a compassionate approach to patient care. My clinic became a place where people didn't just come for dental work, but for the warmth and understanding we offered. One day, as I was closing up the clinic, my receptionist, Anna, approached me. "Olivia, there's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Curious, I walked to the lobby and was surprised to see Emily standing there, looking a bit hesitant. "Emily, what are you doing here?" I asked, genuinely surprised. She took a deep breath. "I wanted to talk to you, Olivia. After what happened with Dad, I realized I haven't been the sister I should have been to you." Her words were unexpected, and I motioned for her to sit down in the waiting area. "It's been a long time since we really talked, Emily." "I know, and I'm sorry. I got so caught up in Dad's expectations and my career. I never stopped to see how amazing you were doing on your own. This place," she gestured around the clinic, "it's incredible. Olivia." I nodded, a mix of emotions swirling within me. "Thank you, Emily. It wasn't easy, feeling like I was always in your shadow, always failing to meet Dad's expectations." "I know, and I wish I had seen it sooner. But I'm here now, Olivia. I want to be a part of your life if you'll let me." Her words were a balm to the years of distance and misunderstandings. "I'd like that, Emily. I really would." From that day forward, Emily and I began rebuilding our relationship. It was a process, with its ups and downs, but it was grounded in a newfound respect and understanding for each other's choices. As my personal life found its harmony, my professional life soared to new heights. I was invited to speak at dental conferences, sharing my insights and innovations in the field. My practice expanded, and I began mentoring young dentists, passing on the lessons I had learned on my journey. One evening, I found myself at a dinner with some of the leading figures in dentistry. I was sharing a table with Dr. Helen Jacobs, a renowned dental surgeon I had always admired. "Olivia, I've been following your work," Dr. Jacobs said, her eyes reflecting genuine respect. "You've brought something special to this field. Your approach to patient care is exemplary." I felt a surge of pride. "Thank you, Dr. Jacobs. That means a lot coming from you. I've always believed that dentistry is more than just treating teeth. It's about treating people." She nodded, "And that's what sets you apart. Keep doing what you're doing, Olivia. You're making a real difference." The evening ended with a sense of accomplishment and a reaffirmation of my choices. I had not only found my place in the world of dentistry, but had also carved a niche that was uniquely mine. This final chapter, New Beginnings, was about more than just professional success. It was about personal growth, healing familial relationships, and embracing life on my own terms. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had led me to a place of contentment and fulfillment. As I looked ahead, I was filled with optimism and a deep sense of gratitude for the path I had chosen. My story was a testament to the fact that sometimes the road less traveled not only makes all the difference, but also leads to the most